the Guardians organization, you've got Jose Ramirez, wasn't a high pick. They developed him. He just kept showing up at every level. Stephen Kwan's another guy. Other than that, it's been a struggle position player wise.
Yes, it has. And I think it comes back a good bit to really what we were just talking about, which is that they have had a hard time. One is that I think they've self-selected a little bit for a player type that does not have huge upside, these high contact, lower power guys. And they've also had a little bit of a hard time. Uh, they've also had more than a little bit of a hard time improving power, improving contact quality. They get guys who can really hit. I think we're seeing that a little bit with Brian Rocchio, who I love, and I still think is going to be a really, really good player. He's got to hit the ball harder. He's got to get stronger. And a lot of other organizations, I think that probably would have happened by now. Now, I think Rocchio is doing some things that we do like, that I do like. He is certainly showing a really good approach at the plate so far, and he's had plenty of balls where he has when he really squares one up, he squares it up. In terms of just getting it on that sweet spot, he can do that. If he were even 10 pounds stronger, right, that would look a lot different in the stat line. And I think, unfortunately, the issue is, I think he's going to be okay, but there are a lot of players who just don't have his innate talent for hitting and approach, et cetera, that will allow him the time to continue to develop. And you'll see a lot of these guys kind of fall short because Cleveland hasn't been able to get them to take that next step forward. And some of the things they've tried with swings have actually not really worked out.
And as you say that, Guardians fans will point to Nolan Jones and Will Benson. Those are guys that they kind of gave up on that have stayed in the. Neither of them are really hitting the cover off the ball this year, but they have stayed in the big leagues and have profiled to be some power, to have some power.
Yes. But that's what both were, right? Jones is a really good example for me of, and Jones has not been great this year, and he has issues that were probably covered up a bit by playing half his games at altitude last year. So just to be clear, I didn't mind them trading Jones, and the guy they got, Juan Brito, I think is a really good prospect. I thought that was a good trade for them at the time, and I still do. That said, Jones had issues, and they didn't help him. And I think to some degree, they kind of kept moving him up because the one thing he could really do was walk. And Cleveland values that. And then he got to the upper levels and was like, oh, this guy, he really struggles actually to hit quite a bit. Actually, there are several deficiencies here, and he didn't get better. And one of them was if you could spin a ball away from him, he had real trouble with it. Well, you go to Colorado and the ball doesn't spin the same way. So that did help. But I think to your broader point, yeah, there's a scenario here that we've seen play out a couple of times, which just get out of this environment into a better hitting environment. Colorado, Cincinnati, two great hitters parks too, where the teams are just go hit it hard, right? You're going to strike out. That's who you are as a hitter. Just go hit it hard. And Cleveland they don't preach that because they are so contact oriented. You could argue that those are two examples of guys who needed to be in another system, maybe to get the most out of their skill set. And Benson was a really interesting one because he's a bit of a risk as a first round pick. He was a very not Cleveland first round pick, right? There were huge questions about it. He'd gone through multiple swings just in high school to try to find better results. It was tools up the wazoo, and he was a Duke commit, an amazing kid. But it's like, God, I don't know what swing you're getting at this point. They couldn't help him. And that is, I guess, maybe a bit of a cautionary tale going back to what we talked about in the first segment, where it's, do you want to take guys where you don't think you can help them?
Yeah. Here, as we're talking about, contact and putting the ball in play, let me ask you this. If playoff baseball is pitching dominated, a really good pitcher is only going to make one or two or three mistakes, and you better be able to impact the scoreboard during those mistakes. Does putting the ball in play and doing that, it would seem that would be awfully significantly harder to do against good pitching, say in a playoff series?
This is a great question, and I don't think anyone has the answer, because there is a counter argument that says, well, you don't get a lot of opportunities against that good pitching, because especially if you run out a lineup of guys who are big power, big whiff, what's going to happen, right? Are you going to get no hit, or right, just fail to get guys on base enough to put a couple of runs on the board. You cannot go into a playoff series or playoff game and think, well, we're going to win this 1-0 or 2-1. You're probably also facing a really good lineup on the other side, no matter how good your pitcher is. So there needs to be some kind of balance. I mean, I prefer the diversifying the portfolio, right? You want the mixed lineup. You want the lineup that's got a couple of guys who make contact and get on base, and you got to have some boppers in the middle of the lineup. You need to have a little bit of everything. And I think that Cleveland.
You keep coming back to Charlie Condon keeps coming back to that conversation.
Yes,
for the
he
Guardians.
does, right?
Yeah.
Well, because I think at worst with Condon, I think you're getting an on-base and power guy. Maybe the strikeouts come up in pro ball because everyone strikes out more in pro ball because that's just the nature of the game. You can live with that. If he's a guy who only hits 240, 250, but does it with 75 walks and 30 homers a year, you're fine with that, right? That is a great outcome. And that player also coincidentally would fit really well in the Cleveland lineup and give them, it's a different look. We often talk about that with pitchers having different looks. You don't want every guy coming out of your bullpen to be a right-hander with a low 3/4 slot and it's sinker slider, except the sinker isn't really even that much of a sinker. They call everything a sinker. I'm like, no. We know what a sinker is. That's a four-seamer and slider, and that's a different animal. You don't want every guy to look like that. We don't want every guy in your lineup to look like that either, because it does make you vulnerable to specific types of pitchers. It's like, it's an odd analogy, but folks who are, the issue we have with bananas in the world is that every banana you get at the grocery store has exactly the same genome, right? They're all clones of the same plant. And there is one fungal disease that is attacking these banana plantations. And once it hits, you can't grow bananas there anymore because they're all the same genetically. So one attacker leaves the whole farm vulnerable. Well, that's kind of what happens if your whole lineup looks exactly the same and you run into a pitcher who has that, that one pitch or that look or something. He's just going to carve your lineup up. And I think Cleveland could run into that a little bit too. Remember, they were in the playoffs, was it 2 years ago? It was like, Cleveland's doing this old school and you may not recognize it because it's not just all 3-run home runs. It's like, they didn't reinvent baseball. It's a different look.
Right.
And I don't know that that's necessarily better or worse, but I do think a hybrid, blending the two is probably the best formula. Understanding also no one's really figured out what works best in October.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it was a walk-off home run that got him to the second round of the playoffs as well.